Joining us now to analyze today's headlines is Courtney Morris, Assistant Professor of African American and Women's Studies at Penn State University. Hi, Courtney.
Hi, Sonali.
Well, the fallout from yesterday's congressional address by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu continues to mount. Almost 60 congressmen and women boycotted the talk, an unprecedented move. House Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi said, quote, "I was near tears throughout the Prime Minister's speech, saddened by the insult to the intelligence of the United States and saddened by the condescension toward our knowledge of the threat posed by Iran." President Obama pointed out that Netanyahu, quote, didn't offer any viable alternatives to negotiating with Iran. While he claimed he didn't want to worsen the partisan divide, the Prime Minister's speech seems to have done just that. Netanyahu is claiming that the talks that State Secretary John Kerry has had with Iranian representatives in Geneva would essentially ensure a nuclear weapons program. Meanwhile, Kerry and his Iranian counterpart wrapped up their meeting today announcing that while challenges remain, they have made a lot of progress. Iran has already rejected a U.S. request for a 10-year freeze on any nuclear development. Courtney, even if Netanyahu's speech was just political theater, do you think it's put the Obama administration on the defensive? And could it influence the U.S. to take a more hawkish stand on Iran?
Well, based on President Obama's response to the speech, I think it actually just made him angry. And, the way that he responded to Netanyahu's comments, he just systematically refuted every claim that Netanyahu made, which is essentially the idea that the United States, by engaging in these negotiations with Iran, is essentially going to give them the tools for the bomb. What the deal is designed to do, as you know, is to allow the U.S. to retain greater oversight over Iran's nuclear activities and to give international inspectors the leeway that they need to come in and to monitor Iran's nuclear capacities. And so Netanyahu's strategy of basically give them nothing unless they give us everything is not a viable strategy, and it's one that is assured to escalate the tensions between Iran and Israel and to possibly push us into war with Iran, which we don't want. That strategy didn't work for the Bush administration, and it won't work now. Now, on the other hand, it could empower certain legislators in the United States who are particularly hawkish and who may reject whatever deal comes out of these negotiations, and that would be a mistake. Israel is really not versed in the art of diplomacy. And they tend to want to use unilateral military action to achieve their goals. That strategy won't work, and it won't make the United States or Israel safer. So it seems like President Obama is really going to stay the course on this one. But President Netanyahu's speech is definitely complicating things and not for the better.
The GOP-dominated House of Representatives passed funding for the Department of Homeland Security yesterday with no strings attached. Republicans had held hostage DHS funding over President Obama's executive action on immigration by separating the department's budget from the general budget last year. But the bid to force a DHS shutdown failed, with House Speaker John Boehner surrendering yesterday as all House Democrats held strong and voted to pass funding. 75 Republicans joined the vote. The capitulation came because Senate Democrats also refused to budge on the Senate version of the same bill. President Obama has vowed to immediately sign the funding bill into law. This won't be the last budget fight the GOP plans to launch in the coming months, as Tea Partier and Republican Representative John Fleming warned, quote, there are more battles coming. Courtney, if the GOP had just left alone DHS funding last year, it would have had the same outcome as what just happened. How much of a waste of time and money is this party willing to engage in?
Well, Sonali, it seems like the GOP is prepared to waste quite a lot of the taxpayers' time and money on this kind of political grandstanding. And really, I think what we've learned from this is that Republicans are just making themselves look bad. This hurts them more than anyone. I think what we've seen in this case is that the GOP, even though they have numerical control of Congress, they are not a unified party. And this is something that can really work in Democrats' favor, because we are seeing that John Boehner really does not have control of some of the more radical members of his party. And that there are real cracks in the GOP. And so I think what Democrats clearly are learning in this lesson is that even though they're a minority, if they unify as a party, they can really leverage those cracks in the GOP to push their own agenda forward and kind of watch the GOP implode from its own political infighting. So that's an encouraging sign. But as you said, this is only the first of many battles to come. And the Democrats are going to have a serious battle on their hands trying to move their own policies forward as Republicans continue to engage in these acts of kind of grandiose political theater.
And finally, the Justice Department released a report on policing in Ferguson, Missouri, that concluded that the city engages in a broad pattern of discrimination in policing. DOJ investigators conducted hundreds of hours of interviews and combed through tens of thousands of police records, and they found that African Americans comprised 93% of all arrests, 85% of all drivers stopped, and got 90% of all citations between 2012 and 2014. The DOJ also found evidence of racial bias in private emails sent by Ferguson police. According to the New York Times, quote, minor, largely discretionary offenses such as disturbing the peace and jaywalking were brought almost exclusively against blacks. Last summer's fatal shooting of Michael Brown began over a jaywalking encounter. The DOJ has failed to bring federal charges against former officer Darren Wilson. Meanwhile, in Los Angeles, protests have continued over Sunday's shooting death of a Skid Row homeless African-American man who went by the name Africa and whose given name has been determined to be Charlie Satterman Robinet. Hundreds of people marched yesterday from Skid Row to LAPD's downtown headquarters to confront Chief Charlie Beck. Well, Courtney, what do you make of the DOJ's report, and can it force change in at least Ferguson?
Well, I think the DOJ report is it's encouraging. I mean, it really confirms what many of us have long suspected, which was that Michael Brown's killing last year was really just a symptom of a much, much deeper problem in Ferguson. And I think the findings really reveal how pervasive racism is in the criminal justice system in Ferguson and how Black people are systematically targeted at every level of policing, from minor offenses to prosecution and sentencing. And I think the explicit racism that comes out in the report is shocking. I mean, there were a number of emails where officials used their government emails to circulate racist jokes about, Black women should engage in abortions to reduce crime, comparing African Americans to monkeys, even joking about President Obama and saying that his presidency wouldn't last long because what Black man can hold down a job for 4 years. And I think that kind of racist rhetoric really reveals how much that colors the way that these officials police Black communities. And so I think these revelations will definitely lead the DOJ to pursue action against them.
Courtney Morris, thanks as always for joining us. We'll talk to you next week.
Bye, Sonali.
Courtney Morris is an assistant professor of African American and Women's Studies at Penn State University. We'll be right back.